What if the fear that tightens your chest was never meant to protect you here? What if it didn't begin in this body, in this life, in this name you answer to now? What if the panic that rises without warning is not irrational at all, but a memory trying to finish a sentence it started somewhere else? There are fears that make sense. Fire burns, heights kill, darkness hides predators. These fears can be traced, mapped, justified. But then there are the other ones, the ones that arrive fully formed, without explanation. The dread that surfaces in a quiet room. The sudden terror of water even when you know how to swim. The inexplicable anxiety around a place you've never been. A sound you've never heard before. A situation you've never lived through. Your mind scrambles for a reason, but comes up empty. And yet your body reacts as if it already knows the ending. Why does your heart race before your thoughts catch up? Why do your palms sweat when nothing is wrong? Why does your breath shorten as if something terrible is about to happen, even when you are safe? We are taught that fear is learned, that it is shaped by childhood, conditioned by experience, refined by culture. We are told to trace it back to a moment, an event, a story we can name. But what happens when there is no memory to return to? What happens when the fear feels older than your first day, older than language, older than your name? Science tells us the brain predicts danger before we are aware of it. Milliseconds before conscious thought, neural circuits fire, muscles tense, blood shifts, the body prepares to survive. This is efficient. This is ancient. But it raises a question that rarely gets asked. What exactly is the brain predicting if nothing has happened yet? Prediction requires data. It requires reference, a past to compare against the present. So when your body reacts with absolute certainty to a threat your mind cannot identify, what data set is it using? Consider how fear behaves. It does not speak in sentences. It does not explain itself. It arrives as sensation first. Pressure, heat, constriction. A tightening spiral in the chest, a buzzing under the skin. Fear bypasses language because it predates it. It lives in systems older than thought, and sometimes it feels personal, specific, targeted, as if it remembers something you don't. You might tell yourself it's imagination or anxiety or a chemical imbalance, but those explanations often feel thin compared to the weight of the experience, because the fear doesn't feel random. It feels precise, as if it knows exactly what it's doing. There are people who fear drowning despite never having gone under. People who panic at the smell of smoke without ever having seen a fire. People who freeze when restrained, touched, confined, even in harmless situations. These fears don't escalate gradually. They detonate, full intensity, no warning, as if a switch has been thrown. Evolutionary biology says fear is inherited, not the experience itself, but the wiring, the readiness, the reflex. But inherited fear is usually broad. Snakes, spiders, falling. Yet some fears are narrow, detailed, almost narrative in shape. They feel less like instincts and more like echoes. An echo implies an original sound. What if fear is not always about what might happen, but about what already did? Physics tells us something unsettling about information. It cannot be destroyed. Not truly. It can change form, disperse, become inaccessible, but it does not simply vanish. In closed systems, information is conserved. This is not philosophy. This is mathematics. This is law. So when a life ends, what exactly disappears? The matter rearranges, the energy redistributes, but the information, the patterns, the experience encoded in interaction and time, we like to imagine death as a clean erasure, a hard stop, a silence. But nature rarely works that way. Nothing else does. Stars don't vanish. They collapse, scatter, seed new systems. Waves don't disappear. They flatten, spread, interfere, imprint. Even sound leaves traces, vibrations embedded in walls, in materials, in memory. Why would consciousness be the only thing that leaves nothing behind? Neuroscience tells us memory is stored in synapses, in chemical and electrical changes across neural networks. But this explanation quietly breaks down under scrutiny. People with severe brain damage sometimes retain memories they should not. People with amnesia can still feel fear without remembering why. People with no recollection of an event still carry its emotional weight. as if the feeling detached itself from the story and continued on alone. Emotion without narrative, reaction without recollection. Trauma researchers have a phrase for this: the body keeps the score. But even that phrase assumes the body witnessed the game. What if sometimes the score was carried in? Look at how early fear can appear. Infants startled by sensations they've never encountered. Children who speak of danger in places they've never been. Young minds that recoil from things no one warned them about. We often dismiss these as imagination, but imagination itself is not free-floating. It draws from somewhere. The unsettling possibility is not that these fears are false. It is that they are incomplete. Think about how memory works in your own life. A smell can take you back decades. A sound can reopen a moment you thought was buried. Memory does not require permission. It does not announce itself. It emerges when conditions are right. And sometimes, it emerges without context, leaving you with a feeling and no explanation. Now, imagine a memory stripped of its timeline. If time is not as linear as we experience it, if past and present are not as separate as they feel, then memory does not have to travel forward in an orderly way. It can bleed. It can leak. It can surface where it does not belong. Modern physics offers a strange perspective here. In the block universe model, time does not flow. All moments exist simultaneously, like frames of a film laid out at once. We move through them, but they are all already there. Birth and death are locations, not beginnings or endings. If that is true, then experience is never erased. It is simply left behind at a coordinate. So what happens when consciousness, whatever it truly is, moves on? What if fear is not an error in the system, but a fragment of awareness brushing against a moment it has already passed through once? This would explain something subtle, but profound. Why fear often feels out of proportion. Why it doesn't respond to logic. Why reassurance fails. You cannot reason with a memory that does not belong to your current story. You can only feel it. This is why fear often feels older than you, heavier than your circumstances. Why it can make you feel small, helpless, overwhelmed, even when you are capable and safe. Because it may not be reacting to now. It may be reacting to then. And notice how fear is rarely abstract. It is sensory, the sensation of air running out, the sound of something approaching, the feeling of being watched, the pressure of impact. These are not ideas, these are experiences. Your body responds to fear as if it has already learned the lesson, as if it has already paid the price. We are comfortable with the idea that skills can carry forward metaphorically, that wisdom accumulates, that lessons shape us. But we resist the idea that unfinished fear might do the same, because that would mean not everything resets. That would mean some experiences demand resolution. Fear might not be there to torment you. It might be there to prevent a repetition. Imagine touching a hot surface and pulling your hand back. The pain teaches you something instantly. You don't need to remember the burn consciously for your body to avoid it next time. The knowledge embeds itself deeper than thought. Now scale that up. What if the lesson was not a burn, but an ending? What if some fears are emergency signals from a previous collapse, carried forward because they were never integrated, never understood, never completed? This reframes fear entirely. Not as weakness, not as malfunction, but as continuity. The problem is that we live in a culture that treats fear as something to suppress, medicate, distract from, override. We tell ourselves to be rational, to calm down, to ignore the signal. But ignoring a warning does not make it stop broadcasting. It makes it louder. This is why fear often grows when avoided, why it sharpens in silence, why it ambushes you when your guard is down. It is not trying to hurt you. It is trying to be heard. And here is the most unsettling thought of all. If fear is memory without context, then relief might not come from eliminating it, but from understanding it. Not fighting it, but listening to it long enough for it to finish what it started. What if your fear is not asking you to run? What if it is asking you to remember? Because memory, once integrated, loses its power to haunt. A story told to the end no longer loops. A lesson learned no longer needs to shout. A warning acknowledged can finally rest. And if that is true, then the question is no longer why you are afraid. The question becomes what your fear has been protecting you from reliving. What if memory does not live where we think it does? What if the brain is not a vault, but an antenna? A a receiver tuned to something older, wider, less contained than neurons and synapses firing in the dark. We are taught that memory is physical, that it is etched into neural tissue like grooves in vinyl, chemicals released, pathways strengthened, circuits reinforced. And to an extent, this is true. Damage the brain and memory fractures. Injure the hippocampus and time itself seems to dissolve. But then come the anomalies, the quiet contradictions, the cases that refuse to stay buried at the edges of science. There are people who lose almost all autobiographical memory, yet still recoil from specific dangers. They cannot tell you what happened, but their bodies react with unmistakable certainty. Their pulse spikes, their muscles lock, their breathing collapses into shallow gasps. Fear without story, alarm without explanation. If memory were only stored in the brain, damage should erase it completely. But it doesn't. Something remains. Something that does not need words. Trauma researchers discovered this reluctantly. Survivors who could not recall an event would still relive it physiologically. A smell, a sound, a posture could trigger a full survival response. The body behaved as if the past were present, as if time had folded in on itself. So where was that memory hiding? The brain, it turns out, may not be the author of memory at all. It may be the interface, the translator, the screen on which something deeper is projected. In physics, information is not bound to a single location. Quantum states exist in probability clouds. Entangled particles share information instantaneously, regardless of distance. The universe does not store data the way a computer does. It distributes it, smears it across systems, encodes it in relationships rather than places. If consciousness interacts with reality the way physics suggests, then memory might not be local. It might not sit obediently inside gray matter. It might exist as a pattern, one that can be accessed, disrupted, or amplified depending on the receiver. Consider phantom limb syndrome. A person loses an arm, yet still feels it. It itches, it aches, it curls into a fist. The limb is gone, but the experience persists. The brain insists the arm is still there, not because it is confused, but because the map remains intact. Now imagine something similar, but far deeper. A life that ends, but leaves its imprint, the body gone, the context erased. Yet the map remains. Some researchers noticed something else, something even harder to explain. Organ transplant recipients who reported new preferences, new fears, new emotional reactions after surgery. Tastes they never had. Nightmares that did not belong to their history. While controversial, these cases hint at a disturbing possibility. Memory might be embedded in matter itself, not just in thought. Biology already supports a version of this. Cellular memory is real. Immune systems remember pathogens. Muscles remember movements. The heart has its own neural network, capable of learning and responding independently of the brain. Memory is not centralized, it is layered. So, when we say the body remembers, we may be understating the truth. Memory might be systemic, and if that is so, then death may not be the eraser we imagine. It may be more like a reboot, clearing the interface but not the underlying data. Physics again offers an unsettling parallel. Black holes were once thought to destroy information completely. Anything crossing the event horizon was believed to vanish forever. But modern theory overturned this. Information is not destroyed. It is encoded on the surface, smeared into radiation, transformed, but preserved. If even a black hole cannot truly erase information, why would a human death be more absolute? This reframes reincarnation not as spiritual fantasy, but as an information problem. If consciousness is a process rather than an object, if it arises from patterns interacting with reality, then those patterns might re-emerge under the right conditions. Not as memories you can narrate, but as tendencies, reactions, warnings. Fear might be one of the most durable forms of information, because fear is survival compressed. It is learning stripped down to urgency. It does not care about context. It only cares about outcome. This would explain why fear can feel ancient, why it arrives without backstory, why it resists logic. You cannot reason with a smoke alarm by explaining that the fire is gone. The alarm is responding to particles in the air, not your reassurance. What if fear is responding to particles of experience, still drifting through you? There is another unsettling observation. Fear often activates in situations that mirror endings, loss of control, inescapability, suffocation, sudden impact. These are not random anxieties. These are terminal experiences, final moments, thresholds. People rarely fear mundane things with the same intensity. They fear scenarios where agency disappears, where the body fails, where time collapses into seconds. Why those moments? Because endings imprint deeply. They compress experience into something dense and unforgettable. If any memory were to persist beyond its container, it would be that one. Some philosophies have long hinted at this. That consciousness carries residue, that unresolved experiences echo, that life is not a series of isolated starts, but a continuous process of remembering and forgetting. Modern science is not comfortable saying this out loud, but it circles the idea. In discussions of panpsychism, in theories of consciousness as a fundamental property of the universe, in questions about whether awareness arises from matter, or matter organizes itself around awareness. If consciousness is fundamental, then memory may be fundamental too, and that changes everything. It means fear might not belong to your psychology alone. It might belong to your continuity. This does not mean every fear is a past life warning, but it suggests that some fears are too structured, too specific, too persistent to be dismissed as noise. They behave like signals repeating until acknowledged, and here is the critical insight. Signals degrade if ignored. They amplify, they distort, they hijack systems. Anyone who has ignored a warning light knows this. The problem does not disappear. It migrates. Fear that is not understood becomes anxiety. Anxiety becomes avoidance. Avoidance becomes limitation. And slowly a life begins to orbit a threat it does not understand. But what if the fear is not asking you to avoid? What if it is asking you to locate, to recognize the pattern, to feel it fully, to integrate it into awareness so it no longer needs to scream from the shadows? Memory, when brought into consciousness, changes form. It loses its raw charge. It becomes narrative, meaning, understanding. Perhaps fear is memory still trapped in sensation, waiting to be translated. And if that is true, then the most dangerous thing you can do is dismiss it as irrational, because irrational fear is often just rational memory without context. In the next segment, we go deeper into the body itself, into the way muscles, breath, and reflexes behave as if they have rehearsed something catastrophic before. We will explore the possibility that the body remembers dying, even when the mind does not. Why does the body react before the mind can intervene? Why does breath disappear before thought arrives? Why does the heart accelerate as if it has already received bad news you haven't heard yet? The body does not wait for permission. It does not ask whether the danger is real, logical, or reasonable. It moves first, fast and absolute, as if survival depends on immediacy. And sometimes, it reacts with an intensity that feels completely disproportionate to the present moment, as if it is not responding to now at all. There are moments when fear feels rehearsed, instant, total, a sudden clamp around the lungs, a freezing of the limbs, a surge of adrenaline so sharp it borders on pain. No buildup, no escalation, just at arrival. As if the body skipped the introduction and jumped straight to the conclusion. This is not imagination, this is physiology. When the brain detects threat, it routes information through the amygdala before the cortex can interpret it. This pathway exists so the body can act faster than conscious thought. Milliseconds matter. But here is the unsettling detail. The amygdala does not evaluate truth. It evaluates familiarity. It asks a single question. Have we been here before? If the answer is yes, the response is immediate and overwhelming. So, what does it mean when the body answers yes, and the mind has no memory of the question? Trauma research uncovered something disturbing. People who have survived near-death experiences often report the same bodily responses when exposed to seemingly unrelated triggers: a tightening throat, tunnel vision, dissociation, a sense of impending annihilation. Their bodies relive something specific, even when their minds cannot place it. But this phenomenon does not only appear in people with documented trauma. It appears in people with no known cause, no accidents, no abuse, no near misses. Yet their bodies respond as if they have already crossed a threshold and barely made it back. Consider the fear of drowning. Not a mild discomfort, but a violent panic at the sensation of water on the face. The kind that overrides logic, strength, training. People who know how to swim, who are safe, who understand there is no danger, yet their bodies convulse as if oxygen has already been lost. The chest burns, the throat locks, the body fights an invisible death. Or the fear of fire. Not heat, not pain, but the sound of crackling, the smell of smoke, a sudden rush of terror that feels older than thought. People report a certainty, not a guess, that something irreversible is about to happen. These are not abstract fears. They are endings encoded in flesh. The body remembers sequences: tightening, suffocation, collapse, impact, loss of control. These are not symbolic. They are procedural. They feel like instructions replaying. This is why fear is so hard to talk yourself out of. You are not dealing with an idea. You are dealing with a reflex that believes the event is already underway. Neurology shows us that memory is not stored as a single file. It is fragmented. Sensory components can exist without narrative context, smell without story, sensation without image, emotion without explanation. This is why a trauma survivor may feel terror without recalling the incident. The body is holding a fragment the mind never integrated. Now imagine that fragment is older than this life. If experience can be encoded in sensation alone, then the story can be lost while the reaction survives. The body does not care about timelines. It only knows patterns, and death is the most powerful pattern of all. Think about how evolution treats near-death learning. Animals that narrowly escape predators become hypervigilant. Their bodies do not wait to confirm danger again. One mistake nearly ended everything. The lesson embeds itself deeply, sometimes permanently. Now, ask a forbidden question. What if consciousness does not end cleanly at death? What if whatever carries awareness forward also carries the most urgent lessons with it? Not memories of names or places, but of thresholds, of what it feels like when the body fails, when breath runs out, when impact is inevitable, when escape is impossible. That kind of learning would not arrive as a memory you can narrate. It would arrive as fear. There is a reason fear feels physical. It lives in muscle tension, heart rhythm, breathing patterns. These systems evolve to act without deliberation. They are older than language, older than identity, older than this lifetime. This might explain why fear often emerges in situations that mirror helplessness, being trapped, restrained, submerged, falling, watched, cornered. These are not random anxieties. These are structural similarities to final moments. The body does not need to know when. It only needs to recognize how. People often say fear of death is universal. But what if some fears are not about dying in the future, but about dying in the past? What if the body is not afraid of what might happen, but of what already did? This reframes panic attacks entirely. The sudden onset, the overwhelming certainty, the sense that something catastrophic is happening right now. The body acts as if it has entered a replay loop, convinced the sequence must be completed unless interrupted. This is also why panic can feel humiliating. You know nothing is wrong. You know you are safe. And yet, your body betrays you. But it is not betraying you. It is protecting you from a scenario it believes is real, because from its perspective, it is. Notice how fear can collapse time. Seconds stretch, awareness narrows, the present moment dissolves into a singular focus on survival. This is exactly how people describe near-death moments. Time slows, vision tunnels, everything becomes sharp and immediate. Fear does not imagine these states, it recreates them. Which raises a disturbing possibility. Fear may be a partial re-entry into a moment that never fully resolved. We like to believe death is instantaneous, clean, final, but many deaths are not. They involve anticipation, realization, seconds or minutes of knowing what is coming and being unable to stop it. Those moments would imprint deeply on any system capable of experience. If consciousness carries anything forward, it would carry that. This could explain why fear sometimes spikes without external threat, why it arrives at night, in silence, when there is no stimulus. The body may be reacting to internal cues, fragments surfacing from deeper layers. People describe these moments as dread, not fear of something specific, but a heavy, sinking certainty that something is wrong, as if the universe has tilted slightly out of alignment. Dread feels ancient because it is unassigned. It has no object. It is pure anticipation without context. And yet, when examined closely, it often carries a flavor, a direction. Suffocation, collapse, impact, exposure. The body knows which ending it is afraid of. This does not mean you are doomed to repeat it. In fact, it suggests the opposite. The signal persists because repetition has been avoided. The fear is a guardrail, a barrier erected to prevent a familiar trajectory from forming again. But guardrails can become cages if misunderstood. When fear is treated as an enemy, it escalates. When it is silenced, it finds new pathways. When it is ignored, it hijacks other systems. But when it is approached with curiosity, something strange happens. It begins to change, not immediately, not gently, but gradually. Because fear is not static, it is dynamic. It responds to attention, to recognition, to awareness. The body is not trying to trap you in the past. It is trying to keep you from returning to it. But to do that effectively, it needs cooperation. It needs the mind to understand what the body is guarding. Which brings us to a deeper question. If fear is the body remembering something the mind does not, where exactly did that memory come from? And how could it travel without a brain to carry it? To answer that, we need to leave biology behind for a moment and confront the structure of time itself. What if the problem is not that we remember too much, but that we remember in the wrong order? What if the past is not behind you at all, but layered through you, overlapping the present like a shadow that doesn't always align with its source? We experience time as a river, a clear direction. Birth upstream, death downstream, the present moment drifting forward, never to return. This feels obvious, intuitive, unquestionable, but physics has been quietly dismantling this picture for over a century, and what it has found is deeply unsettling. At the most fundamental level, time does not behave the way your intuition insists it should. Equations that describe reality work just as well forward as they do backward. The laws of physics do not prefer a direction. Past and future are treated symmetrically, as if they are equally real. The flow you feel may not belong to time itself, but to consciousness moving through it. One model suggests something radical: the block universe. In this view, the universe is not unfolding. It already exists, whole and complete. Every moment that ever was or ever will be is laid out like frames of a film, all present at once. You do not move through time because time moves. You move because awareness shifts its focus from one frame to the next. If this is true, then the past is not gone. It is still there, occupying its own coordinates, and the future is not waiting to happen. It already exists. This idea feels disturbing because it threatens free will, meaning identity. But notice what it does to memory. If all moments exist simultaneously, then memory is not something stored in the past and retrieved later. It is something you access across layers. In such a universe, nothing truly disappears. Events do not dissolve. They remain eternally present, like scars in space-time. So, what happens when a conscious process that has passed through one moment becomes active in another? Imagine walking through a foggy room filled with invisible walls. You cannot see them, but your body remembers where you collided before. You flinch before impact. You slow down. You adjust your path. Not because the wall is in front of you now, but because it exists somewhere in the structure of the room. Fear could function the same way, a reaction to a location in time you have already encountered. This would explain why fear sometimes feels spatial rather than emotional, why it feels like stepping into a zone, crossing a boundary, entering a state where something is wrong. You are not just afraid, you are somewhere you have been before. Neuroscience supports this in subtle ways. The brain constructs the present moment by stitching together fragments of recent past and anticipated future. There is no single now. Consciousness is always slightly behind, slightly ahead, constantly predicting. You never experience reality directly. You experience a model. So, if the mind already lives in a blend of times, the idea that deeper layers of awareness might reach across larger spans becomes less absurd. Now consider near-death experiences. People report leaving the body, observing from above, encountering timeless spaces, experiencing entire lifetimes in moments. Whether interpreted neurologically or metaphysically, these reports share a common theme. Time collapses, sequence dissolves, experience becomes non-linear. If consciousness can enter states where time loses structure, then memory might not be bound to chronological order either. This opens a disturbing possibility. Fear might not be a leftover from the past, but a collision between timelines, a moment where awareness brushes against a previous coordinate and reacts as if it is happening again. Déjà vu offers a hint. That strange sensation that you have been here before, said this before, lived this before. It is brief, fleeting, but powerful. Neuroscience explains it as a glitch in memory processing. But even scientists admit something odd. The brain flags the present moment as memory without identifying the source. What if fear is a deeper, more intense version of the same phenomenon? Not a glitch, but an overlap. Physics gives us another unsettling tool: entropy. The arrow of time is often explained as the direction in which entropy increases. Disorder grows, systems decay. But entropy is a statistical tendency, not an absolute rule. On small scales, time can fluctuate, reverse, blur. Life itself is a local reversal of entropy, order emerging temporarily in a universe trending toward disorder. Consciousness may be another such anomaly, carving structure through time rather than moving obediently along it. If awareness can locally resist time's flow, then it may carry imprints forward that do not belong solely to the present. Think about how unfinished experiences behave. Unfinished conversations linger in the mind. Unresolved trauma repeats in dreams. The psyche seeks closure, completion, integration. It does not like loose ends. Now expand that beyond a single lifetime. If consciousness is a process that continues, then unfinished experiences might not dissolve at death. They might remain embedded in the structure of awareness, carried forward as unresolved tension. Fear could be that tension. Not punishment, not curse, but inertia. In physics, inertia is resistance to change. An object in motion stays in motion unless acted upon. A trajectory continues unless redirected. What if fear is the inertia of a previous trajectory? This would explain why fear often activates at moments of choice. When you approach something new, when you stand at the edge of change, when your life threatens to follow a familiar pattern. The signal fires not to stop you from living, but to stop you from repeating. People often ask why fear sabotages growth, why it appears right before breakthroughs, why panic emerges at the edge of transformation. Perhaps because transformation risks intersecting with an old endpoint. The fear is not of the new. It is of the familiar ending hidden inside it. Time, in this sense, is not a straight road, but a layered terrain. And consciousness navigates it not blindly, but with faint impressions of where it has fallen before. This does not mean destiny is fixed. It means awareness has memory beyond biography. And here is the crucial shift. If fear is tied to specific configurations in time, then understanding it requires pattern recognition, not suppression. You are not fighting an enemy. You are decoding a map. Maps are not meant to frighten you. They are meant to orient you. The problem is that this map is drawn in sensation, not symbols, in tightening muscles, in racing hearts, in sudden dread. It speaks a language we are taught to ignore. But when translated, it can change everything. If fear marks locations in the structure of experience where something went wrong, then paying attention to it could prevent you from arriving there again. Or, if necessary, allow you to approach it consciously and complete what was left unfinished. This is why fear weakens when faced deliberately, why exposure can dissolve phobias, why understanding reduces panic. Awareness alters the trajectory. In a block universe, nothing disappears, but how you move through it still matters. You cannot erase the past, but you can change how you relate to it. Which brings us to a more intimate question. If fear is an echo across time, why does it choose certain people, certain themes, certain lives? Why do some individuals carry specific dread, while others do not? To answer that, we must look at how personal history and larger human history intertwine, how individual fear may be connected to collective events, shared catastrophes, and echoes that ripple across generations. What if your fear was never just yours? What if it did not originate in isolation, inside one body, one lifetime, one narrow thread of existence, but was shaped by something much larger? Something that happened to many, and left an imprint that individual lives still carry. History is not as quiet as it pretends to be. We record dates, wars, collapses, extinctions, but we tell ourselves those events are over, finished, filed away in books and museums. Yet the emotional weight of them does not disappear when the last witness dies. It lingers, diffused, embedded into culture, behavior, and sometimes into people who were never there. There are fears that feel strangely collective, a dread of sirens, a panic triggered by uniforms, an unexplainable anxiety around borders, camps, hospitals, trains, crowded ships, sealed rooms. These are not abstract symbols. They are historically specific. They point to moments where human lives ended in large numbers, under similar conditions, in ways that stripped people of agency and hope. Some people feel these fears intensely, while others pass through the same stimuli untouched. Why? Psychology speaks of generational trauma, how stress experienced by parents can affect children through epigenetic changes, how fear responses can be inherited, not as memories, but as heightened sensitivities. This is well documented. Survivors of famine give birth to children whose bodies are primed for scarcity. Descendants of war survivors often show elevated stress responses without knowing why. But even this explanation has limits. It accounts for proximity, for lineage, for direct descent. What it does not explain are the people whose fears do not match their family history at all. Those who carry dread that seems to belong to a different culture, a different era, a different story entirely. Children who speak of places that no longer exist. Adults who feel a deep, inexplicable sorrow tied to historical events they never learned about. People drawn obsessively to certain periods of history, not lied out of interest, but out of recognition, as if something inside them stirs when they encounter it. These are often dismissed as coincidence, imagination, narrative bias. But patterns appear when you look closely enough. Certain fears cluster around certain historical collapses. Fire, flood, plague, war, starvation, imprisonment, forced migration. These events were not isolated. They shaped entire populations. They rewired how humans related to the world. If consciousness is not strictly local, if it is influenced by informational patterns rather than purely biological inheritance, then large-scale trauma could leave echoes that are not bound to family trees. Think of it like a seismic event. An earthquake does not only affect the ground directly beneath it, it sends waves outward. Some dissipate quickly. Others travel far, surfacing unexpectedly, long after the initial rupture. History may function the same way. There are moments when humanity collectively crossed thresholds, moments where survival instincts were overwhelmed, where fear was not just personal but existential, when the future itself became uncertain. Those moments would imprint deeply on any system capable of awareness, and not everyone would carry them forward equally. In any population, some individuals are more sensitive receivers, more permeable, more open to subtle signals. This is not mystical. It is neurological. Some brains are more reactive, more associative, more attuned to nuance. These individuals feel more deeply, remember more vividly, imagine more intensely. They also tend to carry more fear, but perhaps they are not broken. Perhaps they are tuned. If consciousness is a field rather than a point, then some people may simply resonate more strongly with certain frequencies of experience. When those frequencies align with unresolved historical trauma, fear emerges. This reframes the idea of past lives in a radical way, not as a single soul hopping neatly from body to body, but as patterns of experience re-entering awareness through receptive minds. You may not have been a specific person in a specific place, but you may be carrying a fragment of a larger human story that is not fully settled. This would explain why some fears feel impersonal and deeply personal at the same time, why they carry emotional weight without clear narrative, why they feel heavy, ancient, larger than your individual life. It also explains why these fears often surface during moments of collective stress, pandemics, wars, environmental collapse. When current events resemble past catastrophes, the echoes amplify. The signal grows louder. People report heightened anxiety, dread, and panic during these times, often without understanding why. The present activates the past. The pattern reappears. Fear, in this sense, is not only a warning about personal danger, it is a memory of what happens when systems fail, when safety dissolves, when the world becomes unpredictable. Your fear may be carrying knowledge, not just about your own survival, but about what humans have already lived through. This does not make it less intense, but it makes it meaningful. And meaning changes how fear behaves. When fear is seen as random, it overwhelms. When it is seen as informative, it can be integrated. The terror remains, but it transforms into understanding. There is another detail worth noticing. Fears that feel historical often come with a strange sense of responsibility, a feeling that something must be avoided, corrected, prevented, as if the fear is not just about personal safety, but about stopping something from happening again. This is why some people feel compelled to prepare obsessively, to warn others, to research disasters, to imagine worst-case scenarios. They are often labeled anxious, pessimistic, paranoid. But what if they are responding to a memory of consequences? If you had lived through collapse once, even indirectly, would you not try to prevent it from happening again? Fear might not be the enemy of progress. It might be the conscience of continuity. And yet, carrying fear without understanding its origin is exhausting. It weighs on the nervous system. It drains energy. It narrows perception. It traps people in vigilance, always waiting for something to go wrong. This is why fear must eventually be personalized, translated, integrated into a coherent story. Because while some fears may originate from collective memory, they still attach themselves to individual lives. They still seek expression through specific bodies, choices, and circumstances. The question is not whether the fear is real, it is. The question is what it is asking of you. Is it asking you to hide, to avoid, to freeze, or is it asking you to pay attention, to recognize patterns, to act differently this time? Fear that remains vague is paralyzing. Fear that is understood becomes guidance. Which brings us to the most intimate layer of all. If fear carries memory across time and across many lives, why does it latch onto you specifically? Why does it express itself through your relationships, your choices, your body? To answer that, we must move from history back into identity, into the question of what exactly persists when everything else changes. Why you? Out of all the lives unfolding at this moment, out of all the minds moving through the same world, why does this fear choose your nervous system as its home? Why does it speak through your body, your dreams, your instincts, instead of someone else's? This is where the question becomes uncomfortable, because it touches identity. Not the name you answer to, not the face in the mirror, but the continuity underneath it all. The part of you that feels consistent even as everything else changes. Your cells replace themselves, your beliefs evolve, your memories fade, distort, rewrite themselves. And yet, there is a sense of being the same observer moving through different chapters. You don't just remember your childhood, you recognize it as yours. There is a thread that connects the infant you once were to the person listening now. Science struggles to define this thread. Philosophy calls it the self. Psychology calls it narrative identity. Neuroscience points to patterns of activity. But none of these explanations fully capture the feeling of persistence, the sense that something is carried forward even as the contents of your life rearrange. Fear seems to recognize this thread. It does not attach itself randomly. It binds to the part of you that remains when circumstances change. Notice how fear often intertwines with identity. I am afraid of this. I can't handle that. This is just how I am. Fear does not stay external. It weaves itself into self-concept, quietly shaping choices, relationships, paths not taken. But what if fear is not shaping identity, but revealing it? If certain experiences imprint deeply enough, they may not attach to surface personality at all. They may bind to the core pattern that continues across change, the part of awareness that learns, adapts, and carries forward unresolved information. This would explain why fear often persists even after life circumstances improve. Even when you are safe, supported, successful, something inside remains alert, as if safety has been achieved before and lost. It would also explain why fear feels intimate, why it seems to know your vulnerabilities, why it activates in situations that threaten your sense of agency, autonomy, or existence itself. Fear does not just warn about danger. It warns about becoming someone you were before. People often talk about breaking cycles without fully understanding what that means. They sense repetition, patterns in relationships, recurring failures, familiar endings disguised as new beginnings. Fear spikes when those patterns reappear, even subtly. This is not coincidence. Patterns are easier to recognize than events. The mind may forget details, but the body recognizes trajectories. Think about how you recognize a song after only a few notes. You don't need to hear the whole thing. The pattern is enough. Fear works the same way. A few familiar cues, and the body braces for the ending it remembers. If consciousness carries unfinished patterns forward, then fear might be a signal that a pattern is reforming. This reframes personal fear in a radical way. It is no longer just about survival in the present. It is about continuity across iterations of experience. The reason it feels so urgent is because repetition is costly. There is something else worth noticing. Fears that feel deeply personal often coexist with a strange sense of meaning. People describe feeling as though their fear is important, even when they hate it, as if it is guarding something essential, as if ignoring it would lead to a kind of betrayal. This creates inner conflict. You want the fear gone, but you also feel it serves a purpose. You fear the fear itself, yet resist letting it disappear completely. This tension makes sense if fear is tied to identity continuity. Removing it without understanding could feel like erasing a part of yourself, a part that believes it exists for a reason. This is why attempts to suppress fear often fail. Medication can dull it, distraction can delay it, rationalization can explain it. But unless the underlying pattern is addressed, the fear returns, reshaped but intact. Because fear is not a surface symptom, it is a structural feature. And structure does not dissolve through force. It changes through integration. Integration requires recognition, not judgment, not dismissal. Recognition. To recognize fear is not to indulge it. It is to acknowledge its presence and its message. To ask not, how do I get rid of this? But, what is this trying to prevent? This is where fear becomes deeply ethical. It is not just about personal comfort. It is about responsibility to continuity, to not blindly repeat what has already caused collapse. Some people feel this responsibility acutely. They feel compelled to make different choices, to stop cycles of abuse, to avoid paths of destruction, to question systems others accept without hesitation. These people often carry more fear than average. They are often labeled anxious, overthinking, overly sensitive. But sensitivity is not fragility. It is resolution turned inward. If you carry fear that does not match your biography, it may match a deeper continuity, one that transcends your current story. This does not mean you are trapped by it. It means you are aware of it. Awareness is the beginning of freedom. The next step is understanding how fear communicates, how it uses symbols, sensations, and scenarios to point towards something specific. Fear is not abstract, it is directional. To decode it, you must learn its language, and that language is written in sensation, imagination, and repeated themes. In the next segment, we will examine fear not as a malfunction, but as a signal, a communication system designed to prevent recurrence, not happiness, a system that becomes distorted only when misunderstood. What if fear is not chaos, but code? Not a breakdown of the system, but a message moving through it in the only language it knows how to use. Every warning system in nature is designed to be unpleasant. Pain is sharp. Heat burns. Alarms scream. If danger whispered politely, it would be ignored. Fear is no different. It does not arrive gently because its purpose is not comfort. Its purpose is interruption. Think about how a smoke detector behaves. It does not analyze context. It does not care if you are cooking, celebrating, sleeping, or safe. It detects a pattern associated with disaster and responds immediately, loudly, repetitively, until you acknowledge it or disable it. Fear operates on the same principle. It is not calibrated for accuracy in the present moment. It is calibrated for preventing catastrophic repetition. False positives are acceptable. Silence is not. This is why fear often feels irrational. It is not designed to be reasonable. It is designed to be effective. The mistake we make is assuming fear's goal is to keep us calm. It isn't. Its goal is to keep us alive, and, more importantly, to keep us from arriving at a familiar ending. This is where fear becomes misunderstood. When fear triggers and nothing bad happens, we label it an error, a malfunction, anxiety, overreaction. But from fear's perspective, the outcome was successful. The ending was avoided. The loop was interrupted. So fear learns. It reinforces itself. It says, "This worked. Do it again." Over time, this creates a paradox. The more fear protects you, the more evidence it gathers that it is necessary. The more you avoid, the more avoidance becomes proof. This is how fear grows stronger when obeyed blindly. But fear is not malicious. It is not trying to shrink your life. It is trying to preserve it according to a memory it cannot articulate. This becomes clear when you examine what fear actually reacts to. It is rarely the object itself. Not the water, not the height, not the crowd. It is the loss of control, the point of no return. The moment when choice disappears. Fear spikes when you approach thresholds. First dates, career shifts, commitments, letting go, speaking truth, being seen, being vulnerable. These are not inherently dangerous situations, yet fear often treats them as life-threatening. Why? Because thresholds resemble endings. Crossing a threshold means something else cannot continue. An old version dissolves. A familiar pattern risks breaking. And if a past version of you once crossed a threshold that led to catastrophe, fear will intervene long before logic does. This is why fear often sabotages growth. Not because growth is bad, but because growth contains uncertainty, and uncertainty resembles the conditions under which things went wrong before. Fear does not know the difference between destruction and transformation. It only knows that change once ended badly. So it resists all change, unless it is taught otherwise. This is the crucial shift. Fear is not fixed, it is adaptive. It updates based on feedback. When fear is triggered and you flee, it learns that escape was necessary. When fear is triggered and you suppress it, it learns that silence is dangerous. But when fear is triggered and you stay present, curious, grounded, something unexpected happens. It begins to recalibrate. The signal weakens. The urgency softens. The body learns a new ending. This is not mystical. It is neurological. The nervous system updates its predictions based on lived outcomes. If the feared scenario unfolds without catastrophe, the pattern loosens. But this only works when the fear is approached consciously, not forced, not challenged aggressively, but acknowledged. This is why exposure works when it is compassionate and fails when it is coercive. Fear is not a bully to be overpowered. It is a guard that needs evidence it can stand down. Here is the deeper implication. If fear carries memory from beyond your conscious narrative, then every time you face it safely, you are not just teaching your current body something new. You are offering a different ending to an old pattern. You are resolving something that may have never had resolution. This reframes courage entirely. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to remain present while fear updates its model of reality. This also reframes healing. Healing is not erasing fear. It is completing the signal. Unfinished signals repeat. Completed ones quiet down. Think about how the body responds when a wound is properly treated. Inflammation reduces. Pain subsides. The system relaxes. But when a wound is ignored, pain persists, sometimes intensifies, demanding attention. Fear behaves the same way. It escalates when dismissed. It softens when heard. This is why simply understanding fear intellectually is not enough. You cannot reason with a signal that operates below language. You must communicate with it in its own medium: sensation, presence, experience. This is why practices that bring awareness into the body, breathing, movement, stillness, are so effective. They speak directly to the system that generates fear. They say, I am here, I am listening. The ending is not happening now. Over time, fear learns the difference. This does not mean fear disappears entirely, nor should it. A world without fear would be reckless. Fear becomes proportional, contextual, appropriate. It returns to its original role, guidance rather than domination. And something else happens when fear is integrated. You begin to sense its intelligence, its precision, its timing. You start to notice that it flares not randomly but at specific moments, pointing toward decisions that matter. Fear becomes a compass rather than a cage. This is why some of the most intuitive, perceptive people also experience the most fear. They are not broken. They are receiving a stronger signal. The problem is not the signal's existence, but the lack of translation. When fear is understood as information, you stop fighting it and start decoding it. And decoding fear reveals patterns, repeated themes, familiar scenarios, similar emotional textures across different situations. These patterns point towards something specific, not just what you are afraid of, but what you are avoiding completing. In the next segment, we will confront that moment directly. The one fear is circling, the one it keeps you from approaching, the moment that feels forbidden, heavy, charged. Because fear does not guard random doors, it guards the ones that matter most. There is a reason your fear keeps returning to the same place. Not the same object, not the same situation, but the same emotional territory. The same internal landscape where something tightens, where attention narrows, where the world feels suddenly dangerous in a way that is hard to explain. Fear does not wander aimlessly. It circles. Like an animal guarding a wound, it stays close to the site of injury. You may notice this if you look carefully. Different triggers, same reaction. Different people, same panic. Different years, same dread. The surface details change, but the feeling is unmistakably familiar. The body says, "This again," even if the mind says this is different. Fear is pattern recognition stripped to its core. It does not remember names or faces. It remembers states, powerlessness, exposure, entrapment, loss of control, finality. These are the emotional signatures of endings. Fear responds to signatures, not stories. This is why it can be so confusing. You may logically know that this moment is not dangerous, yet your body behaves as if it is standing on the edge of something irreversible. The heart pounds, the stomach drops, muscles prepare to run or freeze. You are not reacting to what is happening, you are reacting to what this moment resembles. The mind wants to push away from this, to distract, to numb, to flee. And in doing so, it never actually reaches the center of the pattern. Fear remains unexamined, unintegrated, looping. But if you slow down, if you resist the urge to escape the sensation, something subtle becomes visible. Fear has a shape. It is not infinite. It is not everywhere. It gathers around a particular internal image, even if that image is vague or symbolic. A sense of falling, a sense of being trapped, a sense of being watched or judged, a sense of running out of time. These sensations are not random. They are fragments of experience, pieces of something that once had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And fear is strongest right before the end. This is why fear feels like anticipation more than pain. It is the moment before impact, before suffocation, before collapse. It is the body bracing for what it believes is inevitable. What fear never shows you is the aftermath. It does not remember survival. It remembers the approach. This is crucial. If fear is carrying memory forward, then it is likely carrying the most intense, unresolved part of that memory. The part where agency was lost, where the outcome felt sealed, where there was no chance to adapt. Fear is not remembering the whole story. It is remembering the cliffhanger, and that is why it insists on stopping you. Because from its perspective, the story ends badly. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Avoidance keeps the story unfinished. When you turn away from fear every time it appears, you never gather new data. The body never learns that the ending can be different. The pattern remains intact, unchallenged, waiting. This is why fear often escalates when avoided. It has not received the information it needs to stand down. The moment fear truly wants is not escape. It is completion. Completion does not mean reenacting trauma. It does not mean putting yourself in danger. It means allowing awareness to stay present long enough for the nervous system to register a new outcome, to stay with the sensation without being consumed by it, to feel the tightening and not die, to experience the anticipation and watch it pass, to remain conscious where once consciousness may have fractured. This is what transforms fear. In many therapeutic traditions, this is called integration, but that word is too clean, too gentle. Integration is not comfortable. It requires staying where every instinct says leave. It requires approaching the doorway fear guards. Because fear does not guard trivial places. It guards the moment where the pattern can change. This is why fear often appears right before insight, healing, transformation. It flares when you are close to understanding something fundamental. It resists because understanding dissolves its authority. The irony is that fear's existence proves there is something to be known. If there were nothing there, fear would not be stationed so diligently. People often describe a moment in their lives when they finally turn toward their fear instead of away from it. Not dramatically, not heroically, quietly. A decision to stay present one breath longer, to notice instead of react. And something shifted. The fear did not vanish instantly, but it lost its absolute certainty. It wavered. It became less commanding, less all-encompassing. Because certainty is fear's power. Fear operates on the belief that the ending is fixed, that nothing can intervene, that the past is about to repeat itself exactly. When awareness enters the picture, that belief cracks. Awareness introduces possibility, and possibility is what fear cannot account for. If fear is memory from another time, then presence is the only thing that can update it. Presence says, this is happening now, and now is different. Not because you force it to be different, but because you witness it fully. This is why fear dissolves in moments of deep attention. Why panic attacks peak and then fade if not resisted. Why emotions, when allowed to move through the body, do not last forever. Fear survives on avoidance. It starves on attention. But attention must be gentle, curious, non-judging. Fear does not respond well to confrontation. It responds to safety. And safety is communicated not through words, but through regulation, breath, posture, grounding. The nervous system must feel that awareness is present and capable. When that happens, fear begins to release its grip. Not all at once, but layer by layer, and something else emerges beneath it. Grief. Many people discover that beneath their fear is sorrow. A deep, aching sadness that does not belong to this moment, but carries the weight of something lost. A life interrupted. A future cut short. A story that never reached its natural conclusion. Fear guards grief because grief is heavier. Fear says, do not go here, it will hurt. But grief, once felt, brings resolution. Mourning completes what fear can only postpone. This suggests something profound. Fear may not be the core issue at all. It may be the sentinel standing watch over unprocessed loss. Loss that may not belong to this life alone. If consciousness carries forward unfinished experiences, then grief may travel with it. Fear keeps it contained, compressed into urgency and avoidance. But when fear is met with presence, grief can finally surface and release. This is why healing often involves unexpected tears, a sudden wave of emotion that feels disproportionate, as if something very old is finally allowed to end. And endings, when conscious, are not catastrophes. They are closures. Closure frees energy. It releases vigilance. It allows the system to rest. This is the quiet promise hidden inside fear. Not punishment, not endless anxiety, but an invitation to finish something that never finished. The question is not whether you are brave enough to face your fear. The question is whether you are willing to let an old story end. Because when it does, fear no longer has a reason to stand guard. In the next segment, we will explore what happens after that release, how people change when fear completes its signal, how intuition sharpens, how life begins to feel less like avoidance and more like choice. Something strange happens when fear finally loosens its grip. Not all at once, not dramatically, but subtly, like a room slowly filling with light after a long blackout. The world does not suddenly become safe, but it becomes clearer. The constant background tension quiets. The body stops scanning every moment for signs of collapse. And in that quiet, something else begins to speak. People who have lived with deep fear often describe this phase as disorienting. They expect relief to feel euphoric, liberating, obvious. Instead, it often feels empty at first, spacious, unfamiliar, as if a loud voice that had been narrating their life suddenly went silent, and they are left alone with their own presence for the first time. Fear takes up space. When it leaves a vacuum. And into that vacuum comes intuition. Not intuition as mysticism or a supernatural insight, but intuition as refined perception. The ability to sense without panic, to notice without bracing, to feel direction without dread. This is when people realize something unsettling. Fear was never the only signal they were receiving. It was just the loudest. Beneath fear, there is a quieter guidance system, one that does not shout, one that does not hijack the body, one that feels more like a pull than a push. A subtle sense of alignment or misalignment, a knowing that does not come with adrenaline. Many people confuse fear with intuition because they have never experienced intuition without fear layered on top of it. Both can warn. Both can signal danger, but they feel fundamentally different. Fear says, "Do not move or you will die." Intuition says, "This is not for you." Fear collapses options. Intuition clarifies them. Fear narrows awareness. Intuition sharpens it. When fear completes its signal, intuition becomes audible. This is why some people, after deep healing, report feeling calmer but more decisive, less anxious but more certain. They stop overthinking because they are no longer fighting internal alarms. Their nervous system is no longer drowning out subtle information with emergency signals. Life begins to feel less reactive and more intentional. This does not mean fear disappears forever. It means fear returns to its proper scale. It becomes situational, proportional, responsive to real danger rather than imagined repetition. The body learns a new truth. Not every threshold leads to catastrophe, and that truth changes how a person moves through the world. They take risks, but not reckless ones. They trust, but not blindly. They feel emotions fully without being overwhelmed by them. They stop living as if something terrible is always about to happen. This is not optimism. It is grounded presence. There is another change that often follows, a shift in how people relate to meaning. When fear dominated, life often felt like something to survive, a series of threats to manage. Decisions were made to minimize risk rather than maximize authenticity. Safety was prioritized over fulfillment, even when safety was an illusion. After fear integrates, people begin to ask different questions. Not, "How do I avoid pain?" but, "What is this experience asking of me?" Not, "What if this goes wrong?" but, "What happens if I don't live this?" This shift is subtle but profound. It marks the transition from survival to participation. And with participation comes responsibility. If fear was guarding against repetition, then its resolution carries an implicit charge, a sense that you have been given a chance to do something differently, to not waste the awareness gained through suffering. Many people describe this as a calling, though it does not have to be dramatic. It might be as simple as breaking a family pattern, choosing healthier relationships, refusing to pass unprocessed fear onto the next generation, living with more honesty, speaking when you once stayed silent. Fear, once integrated, becomes wisdom, not abstract wisdom, lived wisdom, the kind that comes from having stood at the edge and not fallen. There is often grief here too. Grief for the years spent afraid, for the opportunities missed, for the versions of self that never fully emerged because fear held the reins. This grief is not a setback, it is a final release. Mourning the cost of fear allows you to reclaim the energy it consumed, and something else becomes clear in this phase. Fear was never your enemy. It was your guardian when no other guidance was available. It stepped in when awareness could not. It shouted when subtlety would have failed. It kept you alive, not just physically, but psychologically, until you were ready to understand what it was protecting. Seen this way, fear deserves gratitude, not hatred. Gratitude does not mean clinging to it. It means honoring its role and letting it retire. There is a quiet dignity in that. And here is the deeper realization that often emerges, uninvited but undeniable. If fear carried information across time, if it acted as a bridge between experiences, then healing fear is not just personal, it is cumulative. You are not only resolving something for yourself, you are resolving something for continuity itself. If consciousness is a process that learns, adapts, and carries forward patterns, then every time a pattern completes, something is integrated into the whole. Something does not need to repeat again. This suggests that healing is not isolated. It ripples. When you face a fear that may not have started with you, and you bring it to completion, you interrupt a loop that might otherwise continue expressing itself through other lives, other forms, other circumstances. This is a radical way to think about responsibility. Not moral responsibility, but experiential responsibility. To live consciously is to reduce unnecessary repetition. And repetition is what suffering feeds on. There is a reason ancient traditions spoke of cycles, of return, of lessons repeating until learned. These ideas were not always framed scientifically, but they were phenomenologically accurate. They described how experience behaves when left unresolved. Modern language calls it trauma. Ancient language called it karma. Physics might call it inertia. Different words, same pattern. When fear integrates, inertia shifts. Life begins to move with less resistance, and in that movement, something unexpected happens. Curiosity returns, playfulness, openness, a willingness to experience without bracing for disaster. This is not naivety. It is confidence in awareness. The kind of confidence that knows fear will speak if it needs to, and silence will follow when it does not. As this happens, the question that once haunted you changes shape. It is no longer, "Why am I afraid?" It becomes, "What am I here to experience fully?" And that question leads somewhere very different. In the final segment, we will step back and look at the whole arc. Fear, memory, time, continuity, and meaning. We will ask what it truly means to be human if we are not starting from zero each time, but carrying something forward. And we will confront the final possibility, that your fears are not proof of weakness, but evidence that your consciousness has traveled far, learned hard lessons, and is trying, in its imperfect way, to help you live differently now. What if you were never meant to arrive here empty? What if the quiet weight you carry, the unease that followed you even into moments of safety, is not evidence of something broken, but proof of something continuous? We like to believe life begins clean, that birth resets the ledger, that fear, grief, longing, and intuition are all constructed from scratch inside a single span of years. But nothing else in nature works that way. Rivers do not forget their source. Mountains remember pressure long after the tectonic plates settle. Light from dead stars still reaches us, carrying information across impossible distances and time. The universe itself is a record keeper. Why would consciousness be the only thing exempt? If awareness is not a thing but a process, not an object but a pattern, then it does not simply vanish when one body fails. Patterns persist. They transform, disperse, reconfigure, but they do not evaporate. And the most powerful patterns are not neutral ones. They are charged, emotional, urgent, marked by consequence. Fear is one of those patterns. It is not random that fear feels older than thought. Not random that it resists logic. Not random that it speaks through sensation instead of language. Fear is compressed experience, stripped of story, carried forward because it mattered. You were never meant to fear endlessly. Fear was meant to guide you to an awareness you had not yet reached. This reframes everything. Your anxiety was not a flaw in your design. Your dread was not weakness. Your panic was not betrayal. They were signals traveling farther than memory, reaching you because you were capable of receiving them. Sensitive systems receive more information. They also suffer more when that information has no context. Perhaps that is why some people feel life more intensely, why they question more, why they fear more. They are not fragile. They are permeable. And permeability without understanding feels like pain. But permeability with awareness becomes insight. If your fears are warnings from another chapter of experience, then listening to them is not indulgence. It is responsibility, not to obey them blindly, but to understand what they are guarding against, to recognize the patterns they point to live differently where something once went wrong. This does not mean you are doomed to repeat the past. It means you have been given a chance to interrupt it. Continuity does not demand repetition. It offers choice. Choice emerges only when awareness replaces reaction. When fear ruled, life may have felt like something happening to you, like a series of threats to navigate, losses to avoid, endings to outrun. But when fear integrates, life begins to feel participatory. You are no longer just surviving a story. You are shaping it. And shaping requires courage, not the absence of fear, but the presence of consciousness where fear once dominated. You may never know exactly what your fear remembers. You may never see clear images, names, places, or events. That is not required. Fear does not ask for historical accuracy. It asks for recognition. It asks you to live as if the lesson matters. That lesson might be simple. Do not surrender your agency. Do not ignore your intuition. Do not walk blindly into systems that erase individuality. Do not remain silent when something is wrong. Do not abandon yourself to comfort at the cost of truth. Or it might be quieter. Breathe. Slow down. Stay present. Let endings end consciously instead of repeating unconsciously. The content of the lesson is less important than the act of learning it. Because learning changes the pattern. And when the pattern changes, fear no longer needs to shout. This is why, when people integrate deep fear, they often feel a sense of completion that is hard to explain, as if something finally settled, as if a background tension they never named has resolved, as if a long-held breath has been released. That release is not forgetfulness, it is closure. Closure does not erase the past, it changes your relationship to it. And in that change, something remarkable happens. The future opens, not as a threat, but as a field of possibility. If consciousness carries anything forward, it may not be trauma alone. It may carry wisdom, adaptation, learning earned at great cost. Fear is simply the courier that brings that learning to your attention when you are ready to receive it. So the next time fear arises, instead of asking, "What is wrong with me?" try asking, "What is being protected here?" Instead of pushing it away, listen for its direction. Fear does not want to own you. It wants to finish its job. And once it does, it will loosen its grip, step aside, and allow something else to lead. Perhaps that something is clarity. Perhaps it is intuition. Perhaps it is a deeper trust in your ability to remain present, no matter what arises. You are not starting here. You are continuing. And if fear has followed you across lifetimes, across patterns, across endings, it is not to trap you in the past. It is to make sure you do not have to live it again. This is not a story about fear. It is a story about awareness arriving exactly when it is needed. And now that it has arrived, the choice is finally yours.